The door slammed shut behind me. The scent of lavender and cedarwood thick in the air, Muffin's sanctuary, I supposed. Still, I didn't flinch. Brent and Leslie, my own family, didn't even notice as I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the couch I was now expected to sleep on. As I ran my fingers over the worn fabric, the silence around me was deafening. While they staged their perfect lives, I realized what they'd really done. They gave my bedroom to a dog and pushed me aside. That's when the truth hit. I'd had enough. Their future, gone. I'd give it all away to a place that actually values the living. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Ellie limped up the front steps, the ache from physical therapy still gnawing at her legs. She pushed the door open, the quiet of the house greeting her. It felt too still, almost too empty. She glanced down the hallway, her eyes immediately drawn to the closed door of her bedroom. That was odd. Ellie's heart skipped, and her pulse quickened. She hadn't been home long enough for anything to feel out of place, but there it was, a door that should have been open, a space she hadn't fully occupied since the accident. She moved toward it, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet the only sound. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, but before she could turn it, Brent's voice floated out from the kitchen. "Ellie," he called, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, looking tense, a little guilty. She gave him a tired smile. "Hey, how was everything?" Brent looked down for a moment, then shifted uncomfortably. "How was therapy?" "Fine," she answered. But there was a sharp edge to her voice. Something was wrong. The silence in the house wasn't just the usual quiet. It was too thick. Brent seemed to hesitate, and then, after a long breath, he said, "We gave Muffin your room." Ellie froze, her heart pounding. "What?" "Muffin's been really anxious," he continued, avoiding her gaze. "After the thunderstorm, she's been unsettled. We thought it would help her if she had some quiet space to calm down." Ellie stood there for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. The room that had been her sanctuary, her only place of comfort since coming home from rehab. Now it was Muffin's. The dog who, as far as Ellie could tell, had never once asked for such a thing. Leslie appeared in the kitchen doorway, smoothing down her apron, her face tight with tension. "It's just temporary," she added quickly, but the words sounded too rehearsed, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as Ellie. "She needs her own space for now." Ellie felt her throat tighten. Temporary? Was that supposed to make it okay? She blinked, a lump forming in her throat. "I'll sleep on the couch tonight," she said, her voice low. There was a brief pause, but no one pushed back. It was clear the decision had already been made. Without another word, Ellie turned away from them and moved into the living room. The couch, cold and uncomfortable, awaited her. She hadn't expected a welcome, but still, her mind spun in disbelief. The couch wasn't the problem. It wasn't the physical discomfort of lying on the couch that gnawed at her. It was the emotional weight. The knowledge that her space, her sanctuary, had been given away without so much as a question. That night, no one asked if she was warm. No one checked on her, not once. She lay there in the dark, the house around her still and silent. From the other side of the wall, she could hear the soft hum of the sound machine Leslie had set up for Muffin. The smell of lavender and cedarwood wafted faintly through the walls. More of that lavender, that quiet, soothing barrier between Ellie and the rest of the world. Muffin's new room had been transformed. Aromatherapy diffusers, a soft light, an orthopedic mattress. Everything the dog needed to feel at ease. Everything Ellie had once needed. But now it belonged to someone else. The hurt gnawed at Ellie's chest. She had thought there was still a place for her here. A faint figure moved through the hallway, and Ellie turned to see Megan. She stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with regret. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, Megan simply mouthed, "I'm sorry." Ellie swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, anything, but the lump in her throat made it impossible. She nodded, but the silence between them was louder than any words. Megan slowly disappeared back into the hallway, and Ellie was left alone again. She closed her eyes, but the ache inside of her didn't go away. Tomorrow things would be different, But tonight, she had nothing. Ellie sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents in front of her. The title transfer sat at the top, her name in bold at the corner, 51%. She traced the numbers with her finger, over and over, as if willing them to mean something more. She had fought for this, fought for control. But now, as the silence of the house stretched on, it felt like nothing more than a piece of paper. She wasn't in control. They had taken that from her, piece by piece. Ellie sighed, pushing the stack aside, and picked up her phone. She dialed Kara Blake's office. The line rang 3 times before a voice answered. "Blake and Associates, how can I help you?" "I need to schedule an appointment with Kara Blake," Ellie said, her voice tight. "As soon as possible." 2 days later, Ellie sat across from Kara in a small, sterile office, a fluorescent light buzzing above them. Kara Blake was sharp, her posture straight and confident as she reviewed the documents Ellie had brought. She didn't look at Ellie as she flipped through the papers, her eyes scanning with practiced precision. Ellie's fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair. Kara was taking too long, and with each passing second, the weight of her situation became heavier. Finally, Kara set the papers down and turned to Ellie. "You didn't lose power," Kara said, her voice calm but direct. "You just stopped using it." Ellie blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" Kara met her gaze with steady eyes. "You still own 51% of the home. Legally, it's yours. But if you've allowed others to dictate how it's used, you've essentially given that power away. That's not the same as losing it." Ellie absorbed the words slowly. Her throat tightened. She still had control, but it felt so far out of reach. Kara continued. "We need to reset. A new will, a living trust. Something that ensures you don't lose everything just because you're not actively claiming it." Ellie nodded, the faintest spark of resolve flickering in her chest. Back home, Ellie sat at the dining table again, surrounded by old receipts, photos, and appraisal documents. Megan had been helping her sort through everything, carefully stacking the papers into neat piles. The space felt too quiet, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, the only noise. Ellie's eyes drifted to a photo, a family picture from years ago. Everyone gathered around a table. There was a time when it had all felt stable, when these people felt like her foundation. Now, they were the ones chipping away at it. Megan glanced at her, catching her gaze. She didn't say anything, but Ellie could see the apology in her eyes. She knew. Megan had always known. From the other room, Leslie's voice broke the silence. "Muffin finally has a calm space," she sang, clearly crafting another Instagram post. Ellie could practically hear the click of her phone camera, the perfectly curated picture of Muffin's new sanctuary. Ellie clenched her jaw. There was a sanctuary for the dog, complete with orthopedic beds and calming diffusers. A perfect, tranquil space. And for Ellie, a couch. She shoved the photo aside, the frustration boiling under her skin. It wasn't just about the room anymore. It was everything. The decisions made without her, the spaces given away, the life she used to have slipping through her fingers. Megan stood quietly, gathering the last of the paperwork. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed it again, unsure of what to say. Ellie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. She couldn't stay in that room, couldn't keep pretending that this was okay. "Ellie," Megan called softly, but she didn't turn around. She needed space. She needed to breathe. Ellie knew what she had to do now. It wasn't just about papers or titles. It was about taking back control. Tomorrow she would fight for what was hers. But tonight she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping away. Ellie's pen hovered over the document, the ink tip barely touching the paper. It felt like the weight of the world rested on her hand, the smallest of movements determining everything. She glanced up at Kara, who sat across from her with an impassive expression, waiting patiently. The room was sterile, clinical even. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead only emphasized the silence between them. For a long moment, Ellie thought about what these signatures meant. Her gaze wandered to the top of the page, where Pine Haven Shelter was listed as the primary beneficiary. She had spent hours researching, hours reflecting on what mattered most to her. And in the end, this place, this sanctuary for animals, was what her legacy would go to. Are you sure about this? Kara's voice broke through her thoughts. You've put a lot of thought into this. Ellie nodded, her grip tightening on the pen. Yes, Pine Haven. They'll do more with it than anyone else could. Her voice was steady, but the weight of the decision still pressed down on her chest. Kara's lips quirked into a slight smile. All right, then we're ready to proceed. Ellie signed the document without looking back. A deep breath left her body as the pen made its mark. Megan, sitting beside her, reached over and placed her hand gently on Ellie's arm. The gesture was both comforting and solemn. Megan had been included as a trustee and secondary beneficiary, a safeguard in case anything happened. Ellie hadn't wanted to leave things up to chance, not after everything. Megan was to look after certain assets, to protect what Ellie still had. They had both learned, the hard way, that control could slip through your fingers without warning. Kara shuffled the papers and slid the documents into an envelope, sealing it with a press of her fingers. I'll file everything. These will be kept safe, locked in 2 separate legal vaults for maximum protection. Ellie didn't respond. The process had been grueling, but necessary. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but the sense of finality had settled in like cold air. The decision had been made, the fight over control had been won, but still something lingered, a dull ache she couldn't shake. By the time they returned home, it felt like the world had moved on without her. Brent was already setting up for the evening's live stream in the living room. His voice carried through the house as he spoke to Leslie, organizing the final details for Muffin's big night. Ellie stood in the doorway, watching. The stream would be a spectacle, advertised, planned for days. The house would be a stage, and she was nowhere in it. Ellie, Brent said without looking up, can you stay out of sight while we're filming? We don't need any distractions. The words stung, but Ellie didn't flinch. She turned and walked past them, her footsteps slow but deliberate. She didn't want to be part of this anymore, not the performance, not the spectacle. She walked toward the garage, the coolness of the concrete floor grounding her. Inside, the flickering light from a single bulb overhead cast shadows against the walls. Ellie set a plate down on the small folding table and took a seat, her dinner lukewarm, untouched. She stared at the half-eaten meal for a long time before pushing it aside. The quiet was almost unbearable. Outside, through the thin walls of the garage, she could hear Leslie's voice rising in excitement, the high-pitched enthusiasm of a live stream reaching its peak. The sound of Muffin barking, playful and eager, echoed through the house. The comments were already flowing in. Over 2,000 viewers already, Brent's voice cut through the noise, sharp with pride. Ellie looked down at her hands, still bearing the faint indents from where her pen had pressed into the paper earlier. She was no longer in control of anything, not of the house, not of the lives she had built. The one thing she could hold on to was the small sliver of ownership in Pine Haven Shelter, but even that felt too far away now. The night stretched on, muffled noises seeping under the door from the other side of the house. The live stream reached its peak, Muffin the star of the show. But Ellie couldn't focus on that. She couldn't focus on anything but the fact that she was no longer visible in her own home. The stream would continue, the world would continue to applaud the performance, but in the shadows, Ellie sat alone. Her dinner was long forgotten. Tomorrow things would be different, but tonight the silence was suffocating, and the choice to withdraw had left her hollow. The printer hummed in the corner of the room, and Ellie watched as the pages slid out, the ink settling into the fibers of the paper. She lifted them carefully, as though holding something fragile. The trust document, now complete, had her signature at the bottom, final, irrevocable. Pine Haven Shelter was listed as the primary beneficiary, her portion of the house to be transferred to them upon her passing. She stared at the papers for a long moment, as though willing them to do something more. She had made her choice. The decision was set in stone, but it still didn't feel real. It was as if she were reading someone else's story. After a beat, she carefully folded the documents and tucked them into a manila folder, placing it gently in her knitting basket on the table. It was out of sight, out of mind, or so she hoped. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Megan, heading over after class. Want me to pick up anything? Ellie tapped out a quick reply. No, Just come. Later that afternoon, Megan entered with the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee still warm in her hands. She set it down and sat beside Ellie, taking in the quiet. "What's up?" Megan asked, eyes flicking to the basket at Ellie's side. Ellie handed her the folder. "I wanted to show you something." Megan flipped through the papers slowly, reading over the trust. When she finished, she paused, looking up at Ellie. "Pine Haven? They're getting your half of the house?" Ellie nodded. "When I'm gone. Not now, but it's done. It's taken care of." Megan exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Good. They don't deserve the floorboards." Ellie felt a small pang at the words. She hadn't expected anything else from Megan. "Your secondary beneficiary, by the way," Ellie added quietly. "Trustee if anything happens." Megan's expression softened. "I'll make sure it's enforced." There was a long pause before Megan reached across and took Ellie's hand. No more words were needed. 2 days later, Ellie received a call from Robin at Pine Haven Shelter. Her voice was warm, genuine. "Ellie, I wanted to thank you for your incredible generosity. We've never had a bequest like this, and we'd be honored to give you a tour if you ever wanted to visit." Ellie didn't hesitate. She'd been waiting for something to ground her, something real. When she arrived at the shelter, it was quieter than she had expected. 12 beds, all full. Dogs and cats resting in clean, simple spaces. There was no polished image or staged perfection. Just care. The floors were clean, the animals calm, and there was dignity in every corner. Robin walked her through, introducing Ellie to the staff. "We don't have much," she said, "but what we have, we give." Ellie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. That's all anyone ever needs. When Ellie returned home, she immediately noticed the changes. The furniture had been rearranged. Her favorite books were missing from the side table, and the throw blanket she always kept on the couch had been removed. Leslie was crouched by the window, adjusting the angle of a plant for the perfect shot. A ring light stood in front of her, a phone mounted, waiting to capture the moment. Ellie said nothing. Leslie glanced up briefly and smiled. "I moved some things around. They didn't fit the vibe for the shoot." Ellie didn't respond. She turned toward the kitchen, her chest tight. She opened the drawer where her things used to be, and found her books shoved into the back, out of sight. Her things had been moved, arranged without asking. That night, Ellie received an update from Kara's office. The county title records had been updated. Ellie opened the file, her heart racing. There it was, her name, solid and unchallenged, as the sole owner of the 51%. Brent and Leslie were no longer in the succession chain. It was final. She placed her phone face down on the table, a wave of relief sweeping over her. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt the weight lift. The house wasn't theirs anymore, and she had ensured it would never be. She let out a long breath, knowing that every move they made from here on out, every photo shoot, every staged scene, would be theirs to carry, not hers. The house was hers in the way it had always meant to be, and no one could take that away. The kitchen door slammed behind Brent hard enough to rattle the spice rack. Ellie didn't look up from the sink. She was rinsing a peach, slow, methodical, as if she hadn't heard the storm gathering in the next room. Brent's voice cracked like a whip. "You're seriously leaving everything to strangers?" Ellie placed the peach on the cutting board and turned toward him. His cheeks were red, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm leaving it to people who know what care looks like," she said quietly. Brent laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "You think a dog shelter knows more about care than the people who live under this roof?" Ellie folded the dish towel neatly, then laid it across the counter. "I've spent enough years with strangers in my own living room, Brent. Strangers with my name, but not my respect." Leslie walked in mid-sentence, clutching her phone like a prop. She looked from Brent to Ellie, reading the tension in the air. "Wait, what is going on?" Brent gestured toward Ellie, voice rising. "She's signing the house away, half of it, to a shelter. A shelter, Leslie." Leslie blinked. "You're giving our house to a cat?" Ellie's eyes didn't flinch. "No, I'm giving it to an organization that gives warmth, dignity, and safety. All the things this house stopped offering me. So we're just, what, thrown out for a cat?" Leslie's voice rose, tight and incredulous. "After everything we've done?" Ellie stepped forward, calm and even. No. You're being written out because of how you treated a human being. The silence that followed was sudden and violent. Brent's jaw worked, but no words came. Leslie looked like she might cry, though whether from anger or disbelief, Ellie couldn't tell. Across the kitchen, Megan stood just beyond the doorway, phone in hand. "Can I record this?" she asked softly, her eyes on Ellie. Ellie didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want you to." Megan hit record. Ellie turned back to Brent and Leslie, her voice firmer now, each syllable measured. "You gave a room to a dog before you gave me a bed. You staged photos before checking if I had a blanket. You buried my belongings because they clashed with your feed." Brent opened his mouth, but Ellie cut him off. "I was here, I was breathing. And you treated me like a draft that needed editing," Leslie whispered. "We didn't mean to." "I know," Ellie said. "You never meant to. That's what makes it worse." The sound of Megan's phone capturing everything filled the space between them like a pulse. Brent leaned on the counter, his knuckles white. "This isn't fair." "No," Ellie said. "It's not. And that's why I'm fixing it." Later that night, Ellie sat in Kara Blake's office once again, the last golden light of evening slanting through the blinds. Kara tapped a few keys on her laptop and turned the screen toward her. "This is the contestation clause we discussed. It's ironclad. If either Brent or Leslie challenges the trust, they forfeit everything. No court fight, no negotiation. They're out, fully." Ellie nodded, her arms crossed. "Good. We'll file it tonight," Kara added, her voice steady. "And I'll backdate protections to the original signature. You're covered." Ellie took one last look at the clause. She thought of Brent's face, red, incredulous. Leslie's wounded theatrics. The years of being spoken over, dismissed, softened into silence. She thought of Megan standing at the threshold, finally documenting a truth no one else had ever cared to hear. Ellie gave a small, satisfied nod. Let them try. As she left Kara's office, Ellie's phone buzzed with a message from Megan. Just 3 words. They saw it. Ellie paused on the sidewalk, the evening cool against her skin. She didn't ask what they said. She didn't need to. For once, they weren't the ones writing the narrative. She was. The garage was never meant to be a living space. But over time, Ellie had made it hers. The cold cement floor no longer bit into her feet. She'd laid down a rug, a heavy wool throw draped over the back of her camp chair. A string of warm LED lights hung overhead, soft and low. And now, tucked neatly beside the utility shelf, was a small stainless steel mini fridge. Brand new, paid for in full with her own money. She peeled off the last bit of blue plastic from the handle and opened it slowly. Inside, cans of ginger ale, yogurt cups, string cheese, her evening meds, a bottle of almond milk, and a tiny cold brew concentrate. Nothing extravagant, just things that wouldn't be touched, things that wouldn't be rearranged, hidden, or silently discarded. She set a small sticky note on the shelf. Do not enter. It wasn't a warning. It was a boundary. When she turned around, Brent was standing in the doorway between the laundry room and garage, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "That's a bit much, don't you think?" he said. Ellie didn't answer. Brent stepped into the room, glancing at the fridge like it offended him. "You're making this whole thing really tense." Ellie closed the fridge door with a soft click. "No," she said calmly, turning to face him. "I was tense. Now I'm strategic." Brent's mouth opened slightly like he was about to argue, but he couldn't seem to find the words. Ellie stepped past him without waiting for a response. Later that afternoon, Megan slid onto the stool beside Ellie in the garage, a chocolate chip granola bar already half eaten in her hand. "I like the fridge," she said, nodding toward it. "Very fortified bunker meets midlife upgrade." Ellie smiled, cracking open a ginger ale. "It's just easier this way." Megan chewed for a moment, then swallowed. "You know you don't have to wait for them to feel bad, right?" Ellie turned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they might never feel bad. You don't owe them that moment. You don't have to sit around hoping they'll understand or apologize. You already acted. That was enough." Ellie looked down at her hands, the silver can cold against her palm. "I'm not waiting," she said. "Not anymore." Megan nodded and bumped Ellie's shoulder gently. "Good. That evening, an email pinged on Ellie's phone. Subject: Pine Haven Update. She opened it. Robin had sent photos, construction tape, scaffolding, a new wing breaking ground behind the shelter's original building. Under the image, "We're officially underway. The new space will open by spring." Ellie scrolled to the bottom. The name was bold, underlined, "The Front Room." For those who were pushed into the background, her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Ellie ran her hand slowly down the side of the phone. She thought of the garage, the folding chair, the fridge, the couch she'd once slept on without a blanket. She thought of being asked to stay quiet during a live stream, of Muffin's aromatherapy machine humming in what had been her bedroom. She thought of every moment where she was told, subtly, and then not so subtly, that she belonged on the sidelines. Now, there would be a space for people like her, and it would have her name written into its foundation. The next morning, Ellie passed through the living room and noticed the suitcases, 2 of them, one in bright coral, the other in soft beige, sitting by the front door like they had every right to be there. She found Leslie in the kitchen, pouring filtered water into Muffin's stainless steel travel bowl. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Going somewhere," Leslie smiled without turning. "Taking Muffin down to the coast for a few days. A little reset. Just us." Ellie leaned against the doorframe. "That's nice." Leslie finally turned to face her. "It's just a lot of energy around here lately, you know?" Ellie said nothing. "Oh, and we'll be taking the Tesla," Leslie added casually. "Hope that's okay." Ellie nodded once. Not a flicker of emotion crossed her face. "It's fine." But inside, something locked into place. They were leaving, and she wouldn't miss them. The screen blinked once, then loaded the final confirmation. Joint account closed successfully. Ellie exhaled, slow and steady, as if the cursor itself had been holding her hostage. She sat back in the worn desk chair, the low hum of her garage mini-fridge in the background like a heartbeat. The old joint checking account, hers and Brent's, was gone. The one they had opened back when she thought sharing meant something permanent. In its place, her retirement benefits now routed into a new account under her name alone. She had double-checked the routing number 3 times. No ties. No shared access. Clean. Her phone buzzed barely 30 minutes later. A call. "Brent." She let it go to voicemail. Then a text. "Are you serious right now?" "You emptied the account," she typed back without hesitation. "I closed what I co-owned. There's a difference." Another one came almost instantly. "This is vindictive." Followed by Leslie, not to be left out. It was for mental health, for all of us. Ellie stared at the screen, something sharp twisting behind her ribs. Mental health, a phrase so overused it had become their shield, their excuse. No mention of her health, of how she had been moved, silenced, repositioned like furniture. She powered her phone down. That night, Ellie placed each of her prescription bottles into a fireproof safe she'd bought online, a matte black box with a biometric lock. She pressed her thumb to the reader, heard the click, and opened the lid like a vault. Inside, the meds, her spare insurance cards, the trust papers, and one flash drive. Everything they had once casually handled, left on the counter, knocked to the floor, thrown into drawers, was now untouchable, protected, accounted for. The lock clicked closed like a seal. In Cara Blake's office the next morning, Ellie signed 2 new forms without flinching. "Healthcare proxy and power of attorney updated," Cara confirmed, flipping the folder shut. "Brent is officially removed. Megan's your designated agent now." Ellie nodded. "Good." Cara studied her for a moment. "You know, most people don't get this far. They stop halfway. They burn out." Ellie met her gaze, unblinking. "They never took my money. They took me. That was worse. This is just paperwork." By the following week, Ellie stood outside a modest brick apartment complex tucked between a quiet church and a small public library. The sun was low, the sidewalk dappled with the shadows of late October trees. Megan stepped out of the driver's seat and grabbed a small duffel bag from the back. "You really sure about this one?" she asked. "No pets, no stairs, no shared walls," Ellie said. "And the lease is short. I don't need forever, just peace." Inside, the apartment was small but bright. A kitchenette, wide windows, a bedroom just big enough for a reading chair, and a twin bed. No curated furniture, no filtered Instagram lighting, just silence. Clean, earned silence. Megan helped unpack the basics. 2 boxes, Ellie's safe, her fridge snacks. When they finished, Ellie stood in the empty living room and looked around. Feels like mine already. Megan handed her the last thing, a white envelope with the old address scrawled across the front. You still want to leave this? Ellie nodded. She drove back alone. The house looked exactly the same. Manicured lawn, seasonal wreath, ceramic bowl still by the door for Muffin's leashes. Ellie didn't knock. She didn't go inside. She walked up the steps and slid the envelope through the mail slot, listening for the soft flap of paper hitting tile. Inside was one thing, a clean photocopy of the final trust document. Bold font, clear dates. No room for doubt, no room for them. By the time she made it back to her new apartment, the porch light was on. Ellie unlocked the door with a steady hand, stepped inside, and shut the world out behind her. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look back. The safe hummed softly as it opened under her fingerprint. She placed the house key inside and closed it forever. The first thing Leslie noticed wasn't the sound, it was the smell. A thick, sour undertone rising from the carpet in what used to be Ellie's bedroom. Muffin had knocked over her filtered water fountain 3 days earlier. Brent had wiped up the surface puddle, tossed down a towel, and figured that was the end of it. But the plush carpet had soaked it all in. The padding beneath it, too. And now the subfloor was wet, really wet. It hadn't dried. It had grown darker, softer. And today, when Leslie pressed her heel into the corner near Muffin's bed, it squished audibly. Brent pulled the rug back and swore under his breath. It's mold. It started. Leslie backed away, gagging slightly. That's her room. What are we supposed to do? We have guests coming next week. Brent reached for his phone. I'll call the insurance company. Maybe it's covered. It wasn't, or at least not fully. The agent on speakerphone had a voice that seemed built for bad news, gentle, detached, and slightly apologetic. Water damage from pet activity isn't covered under the standard clause unless it was accidental and discovered immediately, she said. The adjuster can assess and file partial compensation for the subfloor, but anything involving mold remediation will fall under discretionary approval. Brent muted the phone. We should ask Ellie, Leslie scoffed. Ask her what, exactly? To help pay, he said, his voice low. Why would she? Leslie asked. She doesn't even live here. Brent paused. Her name's still on the title, technically. Leslie didn't respond. He dialed anyway. Ellie answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was calm, even, like she already knew why he was calling. Brent launched into the explanation. Muffin, the carpet, the insurance, the cost. When he finally stopped talking, Ellie waited a beat before replying. I no longer pay to be erased. Brent's silence was instant and cavernous. I won't fund a cleanup for people who made a mess of me first, Ellie added, voice quiet but sharp. Don't call me again unless it's about legal paperwork. Goodbye. She hung up. That evening, Leslie sat on the floor in the hallway, staring at a spreadsheet on her tablet. We're going to have to take out of the savings, she muttered. I mean, unless you want to sell something. Brent stared at the corner of the living room, where Muffin now sat quietly on a new dog bed, tail twitching, unaware of the chaos she'd accidentally unleashed. He muttered, maybe the pet sitter left the fountain too full. Leslie looked up, incredulous. You're blaming the sitter. Well, we were out of town. Leslie stood up and waved her arms. This is stress, Brent. It's not just the sitter or the dog or the insurance. It's her. It's all of this. Ever since she left, everything's been off. Brent didn't answer. There wasn't much left to say. That same night, Megan sat at her laptop in her campus apartment, typing with surgical precision. To Robin or Pine Haven Shelter. Subject. Thought you'd appreciate this. The dog just flooded their floor. Mold's already creeping in. Now they're scrambling and trying to call my grandmother for help. The irony is almost funny. Almost. She hit send. Robin's reply came just 10 minutes later. Subject. Thought you'd appreciate this. We'd never let our guests sleep on a couch. Megan smiled faintly, then closed her laptop. At the old house, the smell of damp carpet deepened. Brent sprayed air freshener in bursts, masking mildew with lavender. but the subfloor was damaged now. So was the drywall along the baseboard. The insurance check wouldn't stretch far enough. They'd have to dip into reserves. Leslie was already weighing which sponsored partnerships she could speed up, if anyone would notice the mold smell during filming. They hadn't realized just how much Ellie had done in the background, quietly, without being asked, until she stopped. Now everything was sinking in, literally. The final layer of security clicked into place with a soft digital ping. Ellie tapped the screen twice, watching as her banking app updated. Dual verification enabled. Any withdrawal, any transfer, required a fingerprint and a code sent to her personal device. No more shared logins. No auto-pays they could manipulate. No one else's fingers on her ledger. She stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't just protection, it was punctuation. By mid-morning, Kara had already filed the cease and desist. Financial harassment, it read. Repeated contact after written revocation of access. Attempts to coerce re-entry into shared accounts. The language was exact. Sterile and ice-cold. Consider this a formal boundary, Kara had said. Let the law say what you don't have to anymore. Ellie agreed. She didn't need another word wasted on them. But of course, Leslie needed her version heard. Later that afternoon, she posted a carousel of sunlit photos, Muffin lounging on a beige cushion, a matcha latte, a yoga mat curled just so. The caption was long, rambling. It started with, "Mental health is fragile, especially when the people you trust become distant," then turned sharper. "She's being manipulated," one sentence read. "People are in her ear, telling her lies. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing," comments trickled in, some sympathetic, some skeptical. A few emojis, a prayer hand or two. Then silence, until Megan posted her correction, just one story slide. White text over a plain black background. She knows exactly what she's doing. No tags, no drama, no names. But everyone who needed to understand did. That evening, in her quiet apartment, Ellie sat cross-legged on the floor with a stack of printed photos and a fresh scrapbook. She sorted each image with care, Pine Haven's foundation being poured, the framing of the new wing, the painter's ladder propped against the drywall, still speckled with color. She ran her fingers along the edges of each print before pressing it into place with photo corners. She wrote short captions beneath them with a silver pen. Week 3, roof installed. No leaks, no gaps. Hallway lighting tested. Warm, not fluorescent. Dignity built in. It was a different kind of record. Not legal, not digital. Something tactile. Something she could hold. Later that week, Robin called. Ellie answered on the second ring, the scrapbook still open on her lap. "We're nearly there," Robin said, her voice bright. "The floors are finished. The beds are assembled. The welcome baskets are ready." Ellie could hear voices in the background, movement, laughter. Real life, not performance. Robin continued, "We'd love to have you at the opening ceremony. Would you come?" Ellie blinked. She hadn't imagined standing there. She had given the gift and stepped away, never expecting anything back. But the thought of seeing it, touching the doorknob of a room she had helped create for someone like her, sank deep into her bones. "I'd be honored," Ellie said. Across town, Leslie paced the kitchen, phone in hand, eyes scanning her latest post's analytics. Fewer likes, fewer shares, DMs gone silent. "People are twisting it," she muttered. Brent didn't look up. "Maybe stop talking about her like she's broken." Leslie's jaw clenched. "She is broken. She just doesn't know it yet." Brent finally looked up. "Or maybe she does. And that's the part that scares you." Leslie turned away. She didn't have an answer. She only had silence, and the growing realization that this version of Ellie, quiet, strategic, unreachable, wasn't going to walk back through the door. That night, Ellie added a final caption beneath a photo of the shelter's new entrance. "Opening soon, for those who were never truly welcomed home." She closed the scrapbook slowly and set it on her nightstand, her hand resting on the cover. This wasn't revenge, not anymore. It was reclamation, and it was only just beginning. The voicemail came in mid-morning, clipped and rehearsed. Leslie's voice was slow, calculated, softened in a way that always meant she was delivering a spin. "I just wanted to clarify what happened with Muffin," she said. She wasn't acting out, she was provoked. "You know how she gets when there's tension in the air." Ellie didn't bother replaying it. She deleted it after 3 seconds. The implication was clear. The mold wasn't Muffin's fault. It was the energy, the atmosphere, the invisible stress she apparently absorbed. Not the fountain she'd knocked over, not the negligence, not the silence in the days that followed. Muffin was provoked. Ellie sat back on the couch, the soft hum of her mini fridge settling into the room's quiet. She let the words settle, then said to no one, "I wasn't provoked. I was replaced." That afternoon, Megan stopped by. She didn't knock. Ellie had given her the key weeks ago. The moment she stepped inside, she paused at the threshold. "It smells like lavender and calm," Megan said, closing the door gently behind her. Ellie smiled from the kitchenette. "Diffuser," she said, "and a quiet hallway." The space was small, but everything had its place. One chair, one reading lamp, a woven basket with clean socks, her scrapbook resting open beside a half-drunk cup of mint tea. No chaos, no interruptions, no curated chaos with hashtags. Megan reached into her tote bag and pulled out a tiny box. "I brought you something." Ellie took it carefully and opened the lid. Inside was a brushed silver plaque, no bigger than a hand. Engraved in neat serif lettering, "Your space. Always." Ellie traced the words with her finger. No ceremony, no performance, just meaning. "Where'd you get this made?" she asked. "Print shop near campus," Megan said. "I told them it was for someone who'd finally been listened to." Ellie said nothing, but she set the plaque on the shelf beside her safe. Level, centered, visible. That evening, Robin's email came with no subject line, just a single attachment. Ellie opened it slowly. The photo was wide angle, a panorama of the completed wing at Pine Haven. 12 small rooms lined the hallway, each painted in a different muted tone. Moss green, dusty rose, pale clay, warm, lived-in colors. Each room had a bed, made neatly with a folded quilt at the edge, a bookshelf with 5 or 6 well-worn titles, a nightlight already glowing even in daylight, and a door, a real door, not a curtain, not a divider. A solid door with a latch. Ellie zoomed in, letting her eyes take in every inch. It was exactly what she'd imagined, and more. That night, Ellie made a cup of chamomile, turned off the overhead lights, and clicked on the lamp beside her bed. She didn't scroll her phone. She didn't draft emails in her head or rehearse conversations that would never happen. She pulled the quilt over her legs, laid her head on the pillow, and closed her eyes. The air was lavender and still. The silence was not hollow, it was earned. And for the first time in months, she slept. Not a nap, not a fractured haze between aches and interruptions. A full night, a real one. Across town, Leslie rewrote the same Instagram caption 4 times. Unable to find a version that didn't sound petty or hollow, she eventually posted nothing. Brent sat on the other end of the couch, watching Muffin chase her tail in lazy spirals. "You think she's going to come to the ceremony?" Leslie didn't look up. "I think she already did what she needed to do." She closed her phone and said nothing else, because the truth was starting to land like a quiet knock in the middle of the night. They had sympathy for the dog, and none for the woman they made sleep beside it. The email arrived at 9:14 a.m., subject line blunt and in all caps, "Breach initiated, trust provisions activated." Ellie read it once, then again. Kara's message was clipped, professional, and final. The language was triggered by a clause Kara herself had insisted on months earlier, a contingency Ellie hadn't expected to use, but agreed to just in case. In the event of hostile contact, financial harassment, or breach of boundary by beneficiaries, the trust may be executed early. Ownership suspended, assets frozen, and now, because Brent and Leslie had violated that, by calling, by demanding, by pushing after formal notice, they'd activated it. The house was no longer theirs to manage. It was locked in limbo, unmovable, unmarketable, untouchable. Kara filed the transfer within hours. The title registry updated to reflect Ellie's estate as active trustee. and pending beneficiary handoff to Pine Haven. Sale prohibited. Remodels paused. No equity access. It was as if the house had disappeared around them, but left them inside it. Leslie found out through a call from the real estate agent she'd quietly contacted 2 weeks prior, hoping to float the property before spring. "I'm sorry," the agent said. "There's a hold. County flagged the trust. You'll need written consent from the executor to move forward." Leslie stood in the middle of the kitchen holding her phone, eyes wide, throat dry. Brent walked in, carrying a half-empty box labeled linen closet, and dropped it at her feet. She barely looked up. "They froze it." Brent didn't flinch. "Then we downsize." Leslie blinked, unsure she'd heard him correctly. "That's it? That's your response?" He leaned against the counter, looking older than she remembered. "We lost the leverage. She warned us. We pushed anyway." Leslie opened her mouth to argue, to spin, to reframe, but nothing came out. There was no content strategy for consequences. Across town, Megan didn't say a word. She simply pulled up her phone, hit block on both of their numbers, and set the expiration for 1 month. Just long enough to break their rhythm of control. Just long enough to show she wasn't neutral anymore. Then she slid the phone into her tote bag and made her way to Ellie's new place. Ellie was already seated at the kitchen table, pen in hand, checkbook open. "I'm furnishing the common room," she said as Megan walked in. "Couches, reading lamps, maybe a sound system for music." Megan raised an eyebrow. "That'll be a hell of a space." Ellie smiled softly. "It already is." She tore the check from the book and slipped it into a stamped envelope addressed to Pine Haven. No ceremony, no performance, just forward motion. Robin called 2 days later. "We got the check," she said, breathless with excitement. "Ellie, this will change everything. We've already picked out the furniture, cozy armchairs, a wide circular couch, a coffee table with drawers so guests can leave behind little notes or items." Ellie nodded, the phone pressed to her ear. "Make it welcoming," Robin chuckled. "We already have the name." Ellie tilted her head. "Oh?" Robin's voice softened. "We're calling it The Couch No One Deserved." Ellie didn't speak for a moment. Her eyes welled, but not in grief. It was recognition. She whispered, "Thank you." That night, a delivery van pulled into the driveway of the house Brent and Leslie still technically occupied. A legal notice was duct taped to the front door, one Leslie ripped off in a fury. Brent read it once, sighed, and walked back inside. He began folding a stack of dish towels without being asked. There were no guests coming, no shoots scheduled, no brand partnerships signed, only silence, only a future they could no longer access, because the key was gone, and Ellie had taken it with her. It started as a quiet write-up in a mid-tier estate planning blog, a thoughtful, neatly titled piece. The woman who gave away her house to people who gave her a seat. No clickbait, no drama, just the facts, succinct, human, powerful. Ellie Owens, retired social worker, former homeowner, now trust donor to Pine Haven Shelter. The article included a photo, Ellie seated in a soft armchair beside a window, the engraved plaque, "Your space, always," visible on the shelf behind her. She didn't lose her home, the piece concluded. She reclaimed its meaning and gave it to people who never expected it, but deeply deserved it. Within a week, it spread like light through a cracked door. Elder advocacy forums reposted it with comments like, "She did what I wish my mother could have." Financial planning newsletters cited the trust structure as a model of dignity-led estate design. A hospice nurse in Ohio quoted it on Facebook. No one should be forgotten in their own home. And someone, somewhere, tagged Leslie. The video went up late at night. Leslie seated on the now empty staircase. No filter, no captions. Just her and the quiet echo of the house. "I know there are stories going around," she said, voice low. "But you need to hear the real side. My mother-in-law was never abandoned. We just had to make decisions for the good of the family. Sometimes that's misunderstood by people who weren't here." Within 20 minutes, the comments turned. Fast. "You gave her couch privileges and called it caregiving? You mean the good of the brand. You didn't silence her. You spotlighted yourself. She gave the house to people who don't erase others. That's the real story. By morning, the video was removed. The comments weren't. Brent deleted his accounts 2 days later. Quietly. No notice, no final post. Just gone. Even the LinkedIn profile vanished. Someone in Megan's media class said they saw him at a hardware store, looking older, smaller, unbranded, unfollowed. Just a man buying caulk and looking over his shoulder. Back at Ellie's apartment, Megan knocked lightly before entering, a thick envelope in hand. "You got mail," she said, waving it. From someone important. Ellie took it slowly, eyebrows raised. Inside, a letter, neatly folded. Megan watched her read, then smiled before Ellie even finished. "A full ride," Ellie whispered, her eyes scanning the page again. "Community Health and Crisis Advocacy, funded by," she stopped, looked up. "The Eleanor Owens Trust for Restorative Living," Megan grinned. "They're naming it after you," Ellie blinked once, then again. "I didn't do this for a name," Megan shrugged. "Exactly why it deserves yours." At Pine Haven's annual donor dinner, the final toast wasn't led by a board member or a CEO. It came through the speaker system, a recorded voice soft and steady. Ellie, no intro, no applause cue. Just her voice filling the quiet like a warm coat. Home isn't just walls and floors. It's being allowed to exist without justification. It's being invited to stay without shrinking. No one should outlive their welcome. That's why I gave mine away. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. That night, Robin sat at her desk, sorting handwritten notes from residents, messages of thanks, of memories forming. She opened a pale blue envelope addressed to Ms. Ellie. Inside, a photo, one of the new rooms. A woman in her 70s sat on the edge of the bed, reading. Beside her, a book, a cup of tea, a nightlight already glowing behind her. Written on the back, in careful block letters, "This is the first door that ever closed behind me where I still felt welcome." Robin placed the photo in a frame and whispered to herself, "They'll never be able to rewrite this." The box arrived late on a Tuesday. No return address, no note. Just a plain brown cube with a shipping label and slightly frayed corners, as if it had been passed through too many hands that didn't care what was inside. Ellie set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a while. Not suspicion, not fear, recognition. Eventually, she slid a butter knife under the tape and opened the flaps. Inside, old photos. A scarf she hadn't worn in years. A baking dish with a chip in the corner. Her mother's rosary beads. A handful of Christmas ornaments with her name scrawled in faded ink. Her handwriting, not Leslie's, not Brent's. At the bottom, a yellowed envelope. Her name, barely legible, written in her late husband's hand. She didn't open it. She stood there, hands at her sides, letting the air move around her like nothing had changed, because nothing had. After a long moment, Ellie closed the box again. Not in anger, not in grief, in finality. She picked it up, walked out to the small back patio, and knelt by the fire pit. It took 3 tries to get the kindling to catch. When it did, the flame was clean and quiet. One by one, she fed the contents in. The scarf curled and blackened. The photos folded into orange. The ornaments burst like stars. She didn't look away. Megan showed up later, holding a paper bag with 2 lavender sodas and a bag of rosemary crackers. Ellie was already seated in her chair by the window, the fireplace still glowing in its last embers. "What was in the box?" Megan asked, setting the bag on the counter. "History," Ellie said. Megan frowned. "You sure you didn't want to keep any of it?" Ellie met her eyes and said, calm and even. "There's nothing left to file under family." Megan sat beside her. She didn't push. She didn't try to reframe it. She just handed Ellie a soda, and they clinked bottles gently before sipping. On Friday afternoon, Gwen knocked. She stood there with a ceramic pie dish wrapped in foil and a wool scarf around her neck, despite the weather being a few degrees too warm for it. "Cherry," Gwen said, "your favorite." Ellie stepped aside and let her in. No questions, no pleasantries. They ate the pie warm from the oven, sitting at the small round table that had become Ellie's anchor. They didn't talk about Brent, or the house, or anything with weight. They talked about the last book they both read. The Neighbor Who Played Cello on Sunday Mornings. whether a slice of pie counted as breakfast if you ate it before noon. Warmth unforced. A visit, not an obligation. When Gwen left, Ellie hugged her at the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. Gwen patted her hand. "You've given enough. Now let yourself receive." That same week, Robin called. "2 more rooms," she said, beaming through the phone. "We're calling it the Matthews Wing." Ellie leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. After Margaret and Lillian," Robin replied. "Our first couple. They moved in together this week. Said it's the first time they've ever had a space without fear." Ellie smiled into the silence. "I'd like to meet them someday." "You will," Robin said. "Oh, and one more thing. A beat. We've moved your chair." Ellie tilted her head. "My chair?" "The blue one. The one you donated when we opened. Everyone kept sitting in it, so we gave it a proper spot. Reading room by the window. We even added a little plaque." Ellie laughed softly. "What does it say?" Robin paused, then recited, "Reserved for those who waited too long to be seen, and came anyway." Ellie looked out her window, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was watching life pass by. She felt like she had arrived. The flyers were everywhere, taped to stop signs, pinned to coffee shop corkboards, slid under windshield wipers along half the block. A photo of Muffin stared out in grainy resolution, her tail curled, her expression caught mid-blink. Lost cat, emotional support animal, reward offered. Last seen, Tuesday afternoon. Responds to treats. Loved dearly. Leslie posted the video that same night. Her eyes were swollen, her voice thick with tears as she faced the camera on her front porch, holding one of Muffin's chewed toys to her chest. She's not just a pet. She's part of our family. Please, if anyone sees her, we just want her safe. She's all we have left." Megan watched it in silence, then turned off her phone. She didn't share it. Ellie didn't comment. They didn't have to. The silence spoke for them now. By the end of the week, someone found her. Not through the flyer. Not through the tearful plea. But because Muffin had been sleeping under their hydrangea bush and sauntered into their kitchen like she owned it. The neighbor, an older woman named Ruth, with kind eyes and a blunt tongue, posted her own video. No theatrics. Just her standing beside Muffin, now fed, brushed, and curled on a sun-warmed windowsill. "We found her. She's fine. She stays." A reporter tried to press. "But the original owners—" "She's been here 4 days," Ruth said. "I've taken her to the vet. She's chipped, yes, but I paid the bill. I've got receipts if you're asking." And when Leslie showed up at Ruth's front door, eyes wide and breathless, Ruth didn't flinch. "She came here," Ruth said simply, "and I won't return what didn't want to stay." Brent, standing a few feet back, said nothing. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes, red-rimmed and distant, looked past the porch railing at nothing in particular. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for Muffin. He just watched. As if some part of him already knew this was not the first home they'd lost to neglect. Ellie didn't hear about it until Megan brought it up. "They found the cat," Megan said, setting a small tote of groceries on the counter. She picked her own exit. Ellie didn't react. Just placed a bundle of herbs in a ceramic vase and nodded once. "I hope she's warm," Ellie said after a moment. "She is," Megan replied. "She's sleeping in sunbeams now." That night, Ellie sat at her desk beneath the soft glow of her lamp. A heavy sheet of stationery in front of her. Not a legal document, not an affidavit. A letter. She uncapped her pen and wrote slowly, the lines quiet and even. "You had the house. I had the key. You filled it with edits and expectations. I left with silence and stillness and breath. You performed affection. I learned to name harm. You lost the cat. I kept the door. And when she chose not to return, you called it theft. It wasn't. It was recognition. For both of us." She folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope addressed to no one. Not for mailing, for history. Then, without ceremony, she opened her safe, tucked the envelope between the original trust documents and the photo of the Matthews Wing, and clicked the lock shut. She didn't light a fire. She didn't check her phone. She didn't watch the story spin its way across forums or gossip circles. Let them search. Let them post. let them look everywhere but inward. Because Ellie was no longer missing, and she wasn't returning. The quilt was older than Megan, hand-stitched, heavy, with tiny mismatched squares that told a longer story than any document Ellie had ever signed. It had once belonged to Ellie's grandmother, passed down from back when patchwork wasn't aesthetic. It was survival. Every square held something: a blouse torn at the hem, a curtain from a house long gone, the edge of a pillowcase with initials faded by time. Ellie folded it slowly, running her hand down the seams as if saying goodbye. Robin met her at Pine Haven's new wing, just outside room 12, the last room to be furnished, the final space. "This one," Robin said, unlocking the door. "This is where the quiet ones always end up. The ones who think no one wants them. We saved the best for them." Ellie stepped inside. It was small, but complete. A bed, a bookshelf, a chair by the window, a soft rug underfoot. All it was missing was warmth. Ellie placed the quilt at the foot of the bed and smoothed it once. Robin watched her with a quiet smile. "We already had the plaque made. Want to see it?" Ellie nodded. Just outside the door, newly mounted, was a bronze square edged in blue enamel. It read, "For those who made room when no one else did." Ellie didn't cry. She just reached out, pressed her fingers gently against the metal, and whispered, "Let them rest." Back at the apartment, Megan rolled in her second suitcase and dropped it beside the couch. "Is this okay?" she asked. Glancing toward the guest room, Ellie smiled. "It's your room now," Megan beamed. "I'll bring flowers every Friday. You don't have to." "I want to." True to her word, by the next Friday, a glass jar on the table held bright yellow tulips. The week after, snapdragons, then lavender. They never talked about the house again. They didn't need to. Because across town, it no longer stood the way it once had. First, it sat empty. The walls peeled. The grass overgrew. Then it was gutted, renovated, repainted in colors Ellie would have picked: muted greens, soft creams, door frames in warm gray. It reopened a year later, not as a residence, not as a private home, but as the Matthews Commons, a community center and housing support hub under Pine Haven's banner. Designed for transitional guests, for reunified families, for seniors in limbo. The kitchen had been expanded. The living room turned into a resource library. Where Ellie's room once stood, a new office for intake interviews, now welcomed guests with tea and a calendar of services. A new door had been installed in the side wall, opening into what had once been the garage. Now a private lounge called Ellie's Nook. No press invitations went out to Brent or Leslie. No one asked. No one noticed. Because no one missed them. Months later, a follow-up feature appeared in Legacy and Living magazine, a retrospective on estate activism and transformative philanthropy. Ellie's face appeared beside a wide-angle photo of the Commons, a ribbon pinned to the side door, tulips blooming along the walkway. The article was longer this time, more studied, more reflective. But one quote stood out, printed in bold. In the center of the page, "They gave my bedroom to a cat. So I gave my house to people who knew I was alive." It went viral again, but Ellie didn't track it this time. She was on the couch reading. Megan had fallen asleep beside her, a study guide still balanced on her lap. A new bouquet sat on the windowsill, sunflowers this time. Ellie marked her page, closed the book, and looked out at the fading light. The Commons lights came on across town. A guest flipped the switch in room 12. The nightlight blinked to life. Outside the door, the plaque gleamed in the dusk. Back in her own room, Ellie wrote one last line in her scrapbook. Not a quote, not a caption, just truth. They gave my bedroom to their cat and told me to sleep on the couch. So I gave their future to a shelter that actually values the living.